Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today, Toby Southgate, who is the global CEO at Forsman Bodenfors. And hopefully I got it with my singing words there. Former Chief Growth Officer at McCann World Group, part of an organization that's been around a long time, global organization. Toby, just excited to have you here, and thanks for listening to the podcast and being ready to give it everything you got today. So thanks for being here.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Anthony. And great job, by the way, on the pronunciation. Took me a little longer to get it that close, so well done.
I got a good teacher, so thank you for that. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you personally, a little bit about the organization that I can't promise I will be able to get as perfect the next time, and we'll get into some questions.
Sure, no problem. Forsman Bodenfors first. This has been the last three years or so of my life, but Forsman Bodenfors is a global creative collective. An agency, as some people might describe it, born in Sweden 37 or so years ago. Now global, we've got about 450 people across New York, Toronto, Dublin, London, England, where I'm speaking to you from today, 2 offices in Sweden, Gothenburg, where we were born, and Stockholm, where we had some children, or we sent some children to build a business there, and Singapore and Shanghai. So in our world of creative agencies, we have a couple of fairly, not unique, but fairly special points of differentiation. One being that we are truly global, but kind of more boutique-y in scale. And secondly, that we were born, as I said, in Sweden and still operate the agency in ways that reflect the founding principles. We use the word collective to describe how we expect our people to behave, as well as how we're organized. We've grown up, very much in a sort of bottom-up leadership environment. It was made very clear to me when I was coming into the business that, if we have an organizational pyramid, then Forsman Bodenfors is inverted. It's an upside-down triangle, not the classic hierarchical one. And my job was at the bottom. My job's to make everybody else better. So there was lots about that appealed to me, based on things I'd done in the past, as well as, this is a creative business with a kind of disproportionate reputation to its scale. It's done some staggeringly successful work over time for clients like Volvo and Visit Sweden and H&M and SK2, which is a P&G skincare brand, highly regarded and with a reputation in the creative industries that we work pretty hard to protect. It's a special place, and I'd wanted to be in a conversation with them for a little while before it came up, and then when I had the opportunity to learn more personally about this little place that I'd heard a lot about from the outside, and whose work I'd admired for a really long time, it was just increasingly attractive, and the interview process, while hellish, was absolutely worth it in the end. And then, sort of working backwards, I guess, if I work backwards chronologically, before joining Forsman Bodenfors, which is also part of a holding group, whose mission is to transform marketing, Stagwell's mission to transform marketing, which is a kind of new era marketing services holding company. That story also was a sort of big driver of appeal for me. But I'd been in other marketing services holding companies, and really sort of just, I guess, three career chapters of reasonable success and a couple of epic failure that came at the beginning. But sort of in reverse chronological order, before Forsman and Stagwell, I spent 4 years or so at McCann World Group, as you said, as Chief Growth Officer in the global group in New York, working around and alongside some brilliant people who'd taken McCann network on a real journey, as someone else, I think, who's appeared on this podcast has said, from like the worst big creative network to the best. And I was by no means, in charge of that journey, but I was a contributor to a part of it. And it was a brilliant learning experience. For 10 years before that, or almost 10 years before that, I worked inside WPP, which was built and run at the time by Sir Martin Sorrell, probably one of the biggest personalities and biggest influencers over the whole marketing industry over the last few decades. It was a brilliant experience too, working in just one agency actually inside WPP, but all over the world. I started in the Middle East. I moved to the US and spent some time there with the business, then back to London, then back to the US, then back to London. So bouncing around a little bit. And then before that's sort of 14, 15 years in the big holding companies or the big creatively led networks. I did a couple of stints of 3 years or so each in independent agencies. One very design and strategy led, the other one very much driven around sort of corporate brand strategy, brand purpose, brand vision, how you get an organization pulling in the same direction in terms of connecting business strategy to marketing strategy. And those were all those sort of sequential journeys, I guess. The two epic failures, one when my sort of dream and ambition when I was a kid was to play professional sport, specifically cricket. And I believed I could do that until I was, well, probably the belief lasted way longer than the potential, I think. But I really wanted to be a professional cricket player.
I think you got the right career. Sounds like you ended up in the right career for you.
Maybe. And then I failed
now you're
epically in
20 years
investment
in or
banking as
whatever.
well. Yeah.
Oh, fair.
Yeah. So two failures, like sports and banking, but I'm probably glad of the failures, right? And I've certainly enjoyed everything that happened since, even though honestly a bit of an accident.
Well, if I were to bet, there's probably more than two, and that's why you've become so successful, but chiefly in those two. So let me ask, of course, I want to ask you questions about people. I want to ask you about, aligning creatives, fundamentally the difference between a network of, creatives versus a collective of creatives, and we'll get there. But the thing I really want to start with, because we start with softball questions here, is how do you personally communicate the value of creative? Because as we work with so many organizations around the world, as and different organizations, and if you haven't grown around advertising, media, this kind of like value-based kind of tool is kind of hard to quantify. You're like, hey, I need marketing versus creative, or I need something I need a brand versus something that connects with my audience and stirs emotion. So, of course, you're representing, the organization, but personally, how do you view the value of creative? How do you view positioning the importance of creative? And how do you communicate the importance of what you do? And if you can do that in 3 minutes or less, that'd be great.
Well, you touch on something there that I think our industry is really good at, which is making up words to describe things that can be unclear, but should probably be much more easily defined or much more easily codified. And I think honestly, we also invent things sometimes across the marketing world to justify what it is that we do, because we can't always explain the core impact of an individual strand of work, which is essentially the problem, and therefore my answer to the question. I actually always start with understanding what our clients believe the value of creativity is and how they define creativity. Because if their answer is advertising or a piece of packaging or a logo design, we need to work harder to understand that actually there's something bigger and broader at stake. And my view on this, which has sort of firmed up and been influenced by a lot of people, is that really creativity at its core is about solving problems. Solving problems for businesses, solving problems for the world and the societies and culture around us. What can we do to influence the big themes that our clients' businesses are facing? And if that's the discussion that clients want to have, like how do we find an interesting, innovative, unusual, unexpected answer to that problem, then actually whether we're using a piece of communication design, a piece of an advertising campaign, whether we're using a naming architecture system for a suite of products, whether we're using packaging design or a more innovative spend or allocation of a media budget, those things matter far less than defining the problem up front. And I think a lot of folks, it's too easy in an industry that's evolved so much over the last sort of 10 plus years, the rise of digital, to think about marketing as a cost. And we've got to remember that it should be an investment, right? Marketing, period, is about helping businesses and brands grow. And we if we sit in our individual silos looking at the immediate requirements around us, it's too easy to fall into defending a cost rather than supporting an investment. We always want to be supporting the investment and understanding the bigger goals behind a client's brief and their business challenges.
Yeah. So what I hear ultimately, it's, the clients are facing some sort of challenge, and then you are solving it through, dare I say, well, you're solving it through creative, which is fundamentally creative solutions within the kind of sphere bundle of marketing. When we talk to, or transforming marketing effectively, because that's the mission, when we talk to folks about like what their mission and purpose is, the amount of times people default to say solutions, and going back to that, naming something that is hard to be named. Solutions doesn't actually tell you what it does. And so for me, I ban it. I just say, you can't use the word solutions, whatever it is, because that doesn't actually say what you really do. What is the outcome? What is the, what are the value for them that they get? And what I heard the value out of creative in this case, and creative from your agency and collective, is really like being able to kind of like wiggle through that like place to connect to your customer, to like bring them to you. Because at the end of the day, that's why you do it. What would you say to, let's say, a CEO or an organizational leader who is trying to decide if they need marketing and branding or creative? And then kind of said another way, in your experience, what have you seen be the differentiator between, I'll call it the best customers or the best partnerships, the ones that really see, hey, creative is the way that I want to go, versus potentially a customer or partner that wasn't a fit because they're saying, hey, I just need this level, whereas I really need something transcendent, or, you get what I mean by the question.
Yeah, I do. It's a great question. It's a good analysis of some of the challenges of this industry actually at the moment. And I think one of the things that really appealed to me when I started talking to the team that runs Stagwell, Mark Penn, who put it together, Jay Leviton, who sits to the right hand, our global president, we had good conversations about the kind of dream. What does a dream client look like? What's the best work you've done with your clients in the past? And it actually all came from a kind of common definition of what the problem was, and a comfort with taking uncomfortable conversations. And I think it was probably Mark who said something like, that was how he built his businesses in the past. He wants to be the guy who clients phone when they have a problem that they don't know how to solve, and be comfortable enough in the relationship to sit around a table and define what the problem really is and work a way through it, and do that in an agnostic way, without trying to sell the services that your specific agency or capability might lead you to want to recommend. And so that's been my experience. And Mark probably summed it up more neatly than I would have done before I'd had that conversation with him. But it was always being on the end of a tricky and opaque conversation in some ways. I've got this problem, how do we solve it? And a willingness to work through it together that define great relationships or great partnerships. The ones that sort of start in a pretty tactical place, a very prescriptive place. I've got this idea, or we're running this campaign. It's not quite doing X, Y, Z for us with demographic A, B, C in market N, O, P. So what we really need to do is tune it and replicate it in that market to achieve these goals. And that's a really tactical, single channel, single discipline request that some businesses are really set up to deliver against. It was a great relief to understand that Forsman Bodenfors is not set up to deliver on that brief, that it is set up to have that sort of big, meaty initial discussion and work through a plan together, even if it means that actually what we really need to do is connect you, client, partner, with a PR agency, with a research business that's going to help you really get under the skin of what you think this problem is, but it might not be that. And those things, again, very agnostic, very collaborative by nature. That's, again, a sort of founding principle of a business that, I think the way we work could only have been created in Sweden, or perhaps other parts of the Nordics too. But, speaking about how we do things, radical collaboration is a big part of that. That means giving things away sometimes, and not overclaiming your ability to solve the problem with a piece of, let's call it creative output. For Forsman and Bodenfors, creativity is the approach. It's not the output. like the approach to solving the problem. And you said squiggly or wiggly or something, amazingly, and we didn't talk about this in advance, I can assure all your listeners of this, like we call our strategic process the squiggle process. That's how we talk about it, because it isn't linear. It doesn't have 3 steps or 5 steps or 7 Ps or whatever the hell you want to use. It recognizes that it's human and flawed, and you're going to go round in circles a bit, and that's okay, because that's how you often get to some of the best and most unexpected answers. And that squiggle, that squiggle means a lot to us. We use it it's part of our visual language. I have it tattooed on my arm. Like this little squiggly thing here is part of our process. And so when clients ask us that, so great, creativity, ideas, I get it. I think we do need an unusual problem. How are we going to get there? I've been in places before when the answer is the working process. And the truth is that the working process is just easier to sell sometimes. It doesn't mean it's the way of getting to the right solution. And I'm using that word purposefully because you ban it. It's like get it, because you're trying to stop people from using woolly language. And this world is unfortunately full of woolly language.
So, one of my questions that I alluded to earlier and highlighted that I would ask you is, how do you lead creatives? From what I hear about your process, the squiggly process is fundamentally the folks coming into the door, they need to be ready to solve problems. They do it through their set of tools, which happens to be creative, language, motive, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a 2-part question, I guess, and I'm forming it as I go. One is how do you align those folks and to solve a problem, and B, how do you get a group of people to solve a problem? And I'll kind of translate it to our kind of typical audience, who typically, let's call it senior managers, middle managers. They're leading their teams. They want to drive something. They want to drive culture. They want to drive revenue sales. They want to have process, people following their process. And they're sitting here, they're in their offices, and they're like, well, fundamentally, I know what I want. I know the end state. I don't necessarily know where I'm at. I don't even know where to start. And from our perspective, it's, hey, have a conversation about something. So how do you lead your team at a macro level to drive forward those outcomes at scale? And then how do you lead them at a micro outcome when there is a big, hairy, squiggly problem that you have to somehow come up with a solution for which the language of the problem or the language of the solution might not exist? And I'll give you more than 3 minutes on that one.
well, it's a 2-parter, right? So I probably get 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
I don't know. I don't have a timer up, so feel free to interject at any point. But I think I've seen what I consider to be good and bad examples of leadership inside creatively led businesses, and the things that I've, again, part of the appeal of Forsman Bodenfors was that the things that I'd always found appealing, though difficult to articulate or synthesize for myself, I really found in this place. And those things would be probably three key learnings, right? And I'll try and attribute each of them to people or places. The first, and it took me going to McCann World Group to hear this explained so clearly and by so many senior leaders with such consistency, right? And it was the real constant affirmation of the importance of why the agency exists, like the agency's purpose in the world. And at McCann, they had this incredible 120-year-old story or something called Truth Well Told. And by finding what they call, and I believe still call, a brand's meaningful role, the meaningful role a brand will play in people's lives, you're able to get very quickly to a smart answer to a creative challenge. And they'd done an incredible job of aligning this organization of 20,000 people behind that commitment. And it was in every presentation. It was the first slide of every client meeting, every internal deck. Like, everybody knew. And that's very powerful. So Forsman Bodenfors had some similarly codified assets, but the importance of those assets is critical. Why are we all here? Everyone in the organization has to be able to answer that. Second is that most great work, no matter how complex the problem, no matter how big the task or the output, no matter how long it lasts, is genuinely done by small groups of people, right? And no, no one. Amazon has something like this, Jeff Bezos's 2 pizza rule or whatever it is, the prep that goes into Amazon meetings. So when you come in, you're all on the same page, all that stuff. I think the same. I've seen and learned that actually the more people you have trying to solve a problem, especially if there's a number of people involved for either hierarchical or structural reasons, the longer you're going to take to get to a great answer. And that's something that bigger groups tend to get bogged down by. I've been in briefings where our agency's brought 3 or 4 people and another agency has brought 30. And there are maybe 5 clients. And I know if that happens, that we stand a really good job at differentiating ourselves and engaging more quickly and getting to a better answer faster. And I think that the size and scale of teams is another defining aspect of some great leadership in creative companies. And then the third is sort of a tough balance. It's like teams need empowered, they need to be given space, time, and they also need to be accountable. Like you can't send 3 people off into the wilderness for a few weeks and hope that they come back with a great answer. And actually I think guidance, accountability, and understanding that you can have the space and the time, and then we need to get very quickly to some well-defined results or outputs. And those things for me sort of tend to tie it together, right? Clarity of why we're here, small teams able to get quickly to answers, and giving those teams enough space and also clear accountability, which often is something that creatively led businesses can lack, right? They're really good with the space, and they either get too harsh with the accountability. You've got 7.5 hours today to get these 3 things done. Or we've only been paid for 3 days on this client, so we've got to get the answer out quickly. Like that doesn't work. That's too prescriptive, and it doesn't allow for the messy squiggle, the human element, which actually, that's the defining, at the moment, the defining power of certainly Forsman Bodenfors' global footprint is the kind of density of talent in that group. It's only 450 people, but it's properly global, and all 450 of these people are pretty damn good. There's nowhere really to hide because we give the empowerment, and we also are clear with the accountability.
Yeah. And I think that's critical, like setting the expectations of and setting the culture such that, yes, you have freedom and space, but it's also, I'm going to use the word intense. It's not one that you used, but to say like, hey, we demand a lot, but we give a lot. And for some folks, that's not the right environment. Some people would be like, well, how much time should I spend on this? 7.5 hours? Okay, great. I need that direction. And then I find, at least in the creative problems that I solve, that they are solved when you're not working on them, whether that's in the shower, whether that's driving, whether that's doing whatever. And so finding that like balance. But I also caution you as the listener, if your CEO says, I'm going to go off into the woods for 3 days and I'm going to come back with our strategy, like, run. And I have a very personal experience with that. So sorry to those of you that have been affected by that. That wasn't me, by the way. I'm not the in the woods CEO, but I've seen it very recently, and it didn't go well. So anyway, point of that is, I love the framework. I love small teams being able to solve a problem. I love being able to support them in being successful, while also holding them big, and then allowing them to do that. And then that's where it's the blank space. It's the Jeremy Bearimy, for those of you that might understand that reference, that it's, sometimes always, sometimes never, and maybe on a Tuesday. That's the good place kind of thing. Anyway, okay, last question that I want to ask you. Not including your cricket career, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in the creative industry, who wants to both cut their teeth but do meaningful work? And within the context of, this is recorded in 2024, you've been in the industry 15 years, and, the red ocean, blue ocean, it's evolved greatly across the world. Looking 15 years ahead, what kind of guiding principles, what would you encourage potential creatives to think about as they enter this career? And then you can kind of expand that out broadly to leadership, should you wish.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's never been a better description of the kinds of people that I think will always thrive in, say, the creative industries generally, but certainly in the creative elements of marketing and communications, than the phrase that WPP used to use. And I think that John Steele, the guy who was the global head of planning for WPP for a while, one of the sort of most famous advertising and comms planning brains ever, and he created, or was part of the team that created for WPP, the fellowship program, which was sadly I don't think it exists anymore, but it was essentially a place where talented young people could go to learn how the industry worked. And they did a 3-year rotation around 3 different disciplines inside the group, and 3 markets, I think, as well at one point. And John's description of the kind of people that he was looking for were ambidextrous brains. People with a little bit of left and a little bit of right, a little bit of analysis, a little bit of creativity. And I think that's something that isn't teased out or taught enough in schools. Like I fell into this industry. I had no idea about what marketing was or what creative agencies did, or that you could be in advertising if you weren't an artist or a writer. I didn't know. I wasn't taught it. I didn't study subjects that led me in this direction. But I wish I had. I really wish that I was talking to you now with 25 years experience, not 15 or 18 or whatever it is, because I would have found it earlier. And I think I wouldn't have been able to define it as, I wouldn't have been able to define or claim that I believed I had an ambidextrous brain. But I've seen and would stand by the fact that there are a group of people in a certain, approach to life. If you don't quite know which way you lean, that marketing and creativity is a great place to go. And I think that you find that out by putting yourself in the position where you get uncomfortable quickly and see how you work through it. And you can do that anywhere, right? What's the right way to solve a problem? That applies when I'm, putting my shoes on in the morning, or driving my car to the garage because something's gone wrong with it again, or talking to my kids about why I need them to eat their vegetables, not only the beige stuff on their plate. These are all acts of solving problems. And I think that there's talent in that regard in everyone if they choose to tap into it. So find it if you can. And that description of ambidextrous brains, I think, is never going to change. And I think throwing that forward, you said sort of 15 years out, 15 years ago, the mobile internet on a smartphone didn't exist, barely existed. And of course, everybody in my world right now is talking about, what is AI going to do to all our jobs? Well, it's going to change a lot of them, but I don't think it will ever change the need for that ambidextrous human brain to scope an idea, to frame a challenge, to add human context, because brands exist and companies market to a human world. Even in, I'm using air quotes, even in B2B marketing, it's human beings that make the decisions, right? An institution does not make a decision on which software platform to invest its next 3 years of CapEx in. People within that institution make the decision. So there's a human element that I believe is how work is made, how ideas are created, generated, executed, and sometimes even where and how they appear in the world will change radically in the next 15 years in the way it has in the last 15 years. But those ambidextrous brains, I believe, will always be in demand.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Toby, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about the work that you're doing? And if they're going to Google, it's spelled in English like Forsman Bodenfors, but in
yeah,
Swedish.
Well, luckily for anyone wanting to find us, forsman.com, forsman.com is our global website. All our work, all our history, some of our stories are there. Even a picture of my squiggle process tattoo, I think. I'm easy to find. LinkedIn, Toby Southgate, Forsman Bodenfors. You'll find me anywhere you need me to be. But yeah, it's good to talk to you, Anthony. I love talking about this world. I'm passionate about it, and I wish more people would pick up the phone and have a chat about what makes what makes leadership easier, some of the challenges we face. They're often common, and it's great to be part of your show.
I appreciate it. Well, it sounds like that's an invitation to give you a ring to talk about big problems. But Toby Southgate, thank you for being here today. It's been a pleasure and given us lots to think about, not only about, the lessons learned in our past, but what skills and attributes are needed in the future. So thanks for being here on the show.
Really my pleasure.
Folks, my guest today is Toby Southgate from Forsman Bodenfors. One of the things I'm taking away from today is, of course, the idea of solving problems. But, we talked about solving problems at the beginning and tied it through at the end. What do you need? You need a good team, you need space, you need creativity, but you also need the skill. And what does that skill mean? If you're programmed to only look at things, if you are a hammer, everything you see is a nail, well, that probably doesn't work for the future, because the nail now is going to look different than the nail in the future. So maybe you need to be a multi-tool. And Toby, if you don't mind me saying so, you're like, hey, I wish I was in the industry sooner. I bet that's the thing that makes you freaking awesome. I almost dropped an F-bomb, but I can. It's my show. That's the thing that makes you great, because you didn't just go into it. You got to have, that experience that truly made you the person that you are, which makes you the great creative and leader that you are. And so for folks here, if you think your journey is windy, it's probably supposed to be. So really, embrace the journey, embrace what you're working up. And my favorite quote, personal quote, it's how I live, and I will end the show with this. And it's a Tool quote, and it's ride the spiral till the end. You may just go where no one's been. And so I encourage you to just ride the spiral today, and something great could happen. So thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you want to help us get the show in the hands of more people, give us a review. Just let us know what you thought of this episode. It helps us, expand that, so Toby can have more people calling him, asking him about leadership. So once again, my name's Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.